My name's Hugo Hensley. I'm the head of sports services at Brand Finance, and we've got a really great panel, diverse group of people looking at different aspects of sports. But first, I'm going to have a quick introduction based on some of the data that's gone into the soft power index that you've been exposed to earlier. So the first thing to say about sports is it's very popular. 47% of the people in the world claim to have some interest in sports. So there's no doubt that whether it's effective or not, it's reaching people in the world. What you can see on this map is pretty much all the countries researched had over 35% interest in sport. Very, very popular in South America, and so you can see that that exposure is global. Who's a leader in sport? One of the attributes that fits into our global soft power index is leadership in sport, and you can see in a FIFA Men's World Cup year, you've got Brazil rising above the United States to feature at number one. Actually, the influence of football is visible here with all the top 10 FIFA men's teams featuring in that top 30. Another thing that I think is interesting is that although the top overall global soft power index African nation, South Africa features, or sub-Saharan African nation, South Africa features at 40th, we've actually got 8 sub-Saharan African nations in that leaders in sport category, showing that this is actually a very global, highly exposed and quite equal in that sense metric. So is it important? This chart we've got here shows on that x-axis the importance of different metrics. Each one of those points is a different attribute that fits into the global soft power index. Out on the right, you can see easy to do business with. Slightly further down, you've got admirable leaders. This is based on the data of UK respondents rating the UK. So actually that admirable leaders, although very important, was actually our lowest scoring metric when rating ourselves. So I don't know what that says about our speakers earlier. And then if we look at sports, it's not directly influential. So this just says that when correlating each of these attributes to a country's ability to influence other nations, what that's saying is it's not directly achieving that. But what it does do is get exposure. So we looked at how many people are following sports, and you can see with the World Cup in Qatar, as that's approached, it's built familiarity not just among sports fans who were introduced earlier, perhaps through Qatar's engagement with Paris Saint-Germain Football Club, but actually as it approached, non-sports fans were exposed to it and brought to be more familiar there. What it also does is it improves relationships between countries. A lot of these have been built on historical ties and colonial histories, perhaps. But looking at this chart that shows a various set of metrics, so the Global Soft Power Index, familiarity, influence, reputation of India among different markets, you can see that Jamaica, who play cricket with India in the West Indies team, are rating India much more highly than their neighbors in the Dominican Republic, who prefer baseball. Another aspect that we looked at with Rich was the influence of commercial brands and their interaction with a nation's soft power and influence. This graph shows consumers' consideration of Emirates Airlines, a brand very closely tied to national soft power. Those green arrows show the consideration of the brand among football followers, and the red dots show among non-fans of football. And you can see through Emirates exposure sponsoring major football teams, Arsenal, Real Madrid, teams all over Europe and events, they've actually built up a very strong advantage in terms of being considered for their products and services. The last one we're going to look at is perhaps a very pressing question at the moment. This is something that was raised a lot last year during the Winter Olympics in Beijing, but also around the Qatar World Cup, different countries taking different positions. But should sports teams and organizations take a stance on political issues? This was a very divisive question, with 21% completely disagreeing that a political stance should be taken, but 23% saying they completely agree. So whether you take a political stance or not, you're going to upset some people regardless of what position or stance that is you're taking. This was brought up recently with the FIA's decision to try and muzzle Formula One drivers, and I think they've backed down now, showing that the power of the drivers themselves as characters, Lewis Hamilton particularly speaking out, that actually they need their personal right to take a stance there. So with that, I'd like to introduce my panel who are joining me. I don't know if I've got an image of them, but we've got, if you'd like to come up, we've got, yeah. So Stephanie from Women in Sport, David Mitchell, who's worked for many years integrating into Formula One teams and working out how they work. Saskia Tidy, current Olympic sailor, 2 Olympics under her belt already. And David Magliano, who was the director of marketing for the London 2012 Olympic bid and the director of commercial marketing for the 2018 FIFA World Cup bid. So we'll see how each of those goes. Thanks for joining, guys. First question, I think generally, you've all got a different set of experience, so a charity, an athlete yourself, Formula One, organisation of a mega event. How do you see sports having been used as soft power from your perspective? Let's start at this end.
So my perspective is on the mega events, and you know, it's interesting because there's no question that hosting a mega event confers soft power. It's a real rich source of soft power capital. The thing is to win the right to host that mega event in the first place requires oodles of soft power, and in fact, as I think we could infer from some of the controversy around this, hard power as well in the shape of economic incentive.
David?
So my perspective is Formula One. I've worked for the last 9 seasons with the Mercedes Formula One team. And I see soft power with Formula One as 3 levels, really. There's the level of the state and the country and cities to a certain extent. There's the right to host and competing for the right to host a race. There's the level at the team level, which is, you know, sort of there's big brands involved who are looking for global influence through supporting and paying for teams. And then there's at the individual sports level. And some sports people, like you mentioned, Lewis, have transcended Formula One and have a global stage. So I think there are soft power is being used by many organisations at many different levels.
Saskia?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be involved in 2 Olympic Games. I think the Olympic Games is a mega sporting event which we really get to see the cultures from the athletes and also the hosting nation. I think it wasn't until the end of the pandemic and competing in Tokyo during that time as an athlete being locked down, locked away from my competitors, you really get to see the importance of mixing with other nations and cultures and how that makes you better as an athlete in sport.
Steph?
I'm a bit thrown by the toilet presentation, actually. I'm still slightly thinking about that. But no, I think it's very interesting because our charity is all about the gender equality within sport, or lack of it, how this interrelates with soft power. Because there's no doubt that men's sport and soft power, you can see that link over time. But because women have been really quite viciously excluded from sport for many, many years, certainly from the modern Olympics, for example, and only in the last sort of 10 or 20 years, with the exception perhaps of athletics and tennis, but the team sports have ever had any real visibility, that it hasn't probably to date been an essential part of soft power. But what will be very, very interesting is how that changes now with the UEFA Championships last year here being such an immense illustration of the soft power that tournament could bring, and with what's happening in India with cricket, women's cricket being such an illustration of commitment and investment, how that might change quite a lot. But what I was quite interested in reading your brochure and looking into your index is how little you saw gender equality feature at all in soft power. And it's very interesting because I know the votes were, I've been finding out about it anyway, were pretty well 50-50 from men and women. But where was that gender equality? When you dug into it, you saw that most of the nations who were higher up on the soft power index were scoring better on gender equality indices. And And certainly UAE, I've been just checking their legislature. I don't know how many UAE people are here, but it's certainly been leading the Arab nations and to a degree North African, Middle East nations in rapid change as regards to the status of women within the country. Not there yet. So I'm looking at it through two lenses, really, the female sport lens and the overall gender equality lens. And it's quite a complicated picture, I'd say.
Yeah, I mentioned on my, my little data intro that actually sport wasn't the most influential factor in driving a nation's influence over others. But what we did see was the awareness and familiarity it can build and its use as a platform or a window through to share the values of another country, I think, more strongly. And so you can't build the soft power on nothing. You have to hit all of those important attributes. So things like the Qatar World Cup showing off strong infrastructure, friendly people, the ability to organize an event, perhaps in balance with those other attributes that were criticized more in the media, definitely in the UK, around things like equality, human rights, diversity, LGBT rights. But thinking of sporting mega events, but on that sort of hosting side, David Magliano, could I come to you and sort of say, did you find them to be effective, and was that a key part of effective in building soft power, and was that a key part of decisions to try and host them? So firstly, the successful London 2012 bid, and then unsuccessful FIFA World Cup bid.
Yeah, I don't think. So I was involved, I suppose, in the decision to bid for the 2012 Olympic Games. I don't think it was a consideration that somehow this is going to add to the UK soft power capital. I don't think. I mean, different stakeholders were coming at it with different points of view. The British Olympic Association were looking as a way of boosting interest and participation in Olympic sport. Some sports of which, don't enjoy the same high profile that, say, soccer, football does. The mayor at the time, Ken Livingstone, I think he's on record as saying that sport, not particularly an interest of his, but he saw the Olympics as a way of regenerating the East End of London and accelerating infrastructure investment by 20 to 30 years. So the decision to bid and to host, I think, was driven by a number of different motivations, but unquestionably it's quite a long run up. It's about 8 years. I think the first 6 of those is generally stories of things not being ready, that kind of sort of BBC mockumentary. It's all of that. It's only until you get into the last, once the torch relay starts, that sense of unity begins to form. The media sort of switch. It's very predictable, actually. You can see this if you look at the Olympics, practically across any host city. The media kind of go from being sort of snipey and negative to a bit of sort of rah-rah. You start to get that national unity forming. You get the projection of a positive image. You get the showcasing of the infrastructure, the cultural attractions, all the positive things. And now you realise that you've got something on your hands. You've clearly got the excitement of the sport on the field, but what you have created is something that, puts the country, the city on the map and has now conferred a sort of investment in soft power.
Yeah. And then perhaps, Saskia, you could say from the inside, being an Olympian, I don't think at London 2012, but how do you see that countries investing in it, perhaps, and you're trying to get financing to succeed as an athlete, but also your role at the Olympics as an ambassador, you're perhaps co-opted into part of that building of the soft power.
Yeah, I think the Tokyo Olympics is probably a really good example of that. Japan went through a pretty brutal time trying to host the Olympic Games and during the pandemic, and from the inside, as athletes, we really had to trust that if it went ahead, it would be run correctly and be done in the right way to keep everyone safe first and foremost. But I think what Japan managed to achieve with the Olympic Games going ahead in 2021 was extraordinary, and certainly from my point of view, but it felt like a glimmer of hope for the world that it went ahead at sort of the end of that horrendous time we all had to go through in COVID. And it was a glimmer of we will be together and we are better together as a world. And I think they did it really well from the inside. I felt so safe. I felt really respected in what the job I was trying to do as an athlete. And there was a huge amount of negative press leading up to the Olympics, which was understandable. But Japan really turned it around and made an incredible event from it. Yes, we didn't have the audience that you would generally have at an Olympic Games, but the effort that went into the social media side of it, the engagement over the air waves was incredible. And certainly being that far away from home, you really felt the amount of backing and support from your nation back at home watching. So I do think, I think this mega sporting events like the Olympics, that to go ahead in Japan during that time was pretty amazing.
I think it's interesting hearing you talking about the London Olympics, because there was this whole sort of someone talked earlier about how we're good at being down on ourselves here, but I just remember in the build-up, everyone I knew in London was getting out of London. They're saying, oh my God, the tubes are already so busy, this is also... And everyone sort of left, and then it was the most amazing feeling. We were so united, so proud, and loved all the volunteers. And there's something quite interesting about the vision into your country of the crowds even. I mean, and particularly the Paralympics. The crowds were just, they were really, it was emotional, wasn't it, to feel that mood in the crowds. And I think last year in the summer as well, what's so fascinating about men's and women's football is the difference in the crowds. If you go to the FA Cup final for the women, the crowds are truly reflective of London's population. You know, it's every age, you know, equal gender and fully diverse. And, you know, all the mounted police have got absolutely nothing to do. It's just an amazingly different crowd than in a sort of typically rather sort of conflicting kind of male crowd, really. So I think there's something about the way you see him, but I'm also very conscious, and one of the previous speakers said, that you're very, very aware of your own nation and what you're proud of about your own nation in sport, and other people sort of only notice a bit. I think we've noticed Argentina recently in football, but I've just met so many different people today, and last night some Lithuanians, talking about what they're proud of in their sport, talking about the Mongolian 3x3 women's basketball players being brilliant, you know, and yet you only see other countries very fleetingly through sport. So I think your power gauge is probably quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I think the use of sport by different countries is very interesting. Some try to achieve that sort of Cold War style. We need to have the best athletes to win. That's what's going to build our power. But now there's a lot of on the side of hosting, and Qatar, I don't think won a game. Maybe they scored one goal at the World Cup, but that wasn't what it was about for them. One area that's really growing is Formula One. So people are trying to snap up races here, there, and everywhere at the moment. Not just, you see a few in the Middle East, and Abu Dhabi wants to secure the final race of the season or whatever it is, but also Miami, Vegas also trying to build it. What can you say from your view from inside teams and being close to Formula One as to how does that differ for not a nation but a commercial entity trying to interact with that, and how do they take on what the values of different people are and make those decisions?
Well, I think it's worth saying to start with, let's be honest, in the great scheme of things, sport is not important. We've seen today Ukraine, we've seen toilet health, we've seen so many different big issues, and what we do is just sport. It's not necessary, it's fun. So from a relatively, it's something that doesn't really feature. However, it does attract a huge audience, and those of us who are involved in it take it very seriously. I think what I see is wider than Formula One. What you're tending to see with soft power is that countries and cities and whatever else are acting very much like fans. With fan psychology, when you dig into it, there are two behaviours that fans have. There's what we call burging and chorfing. And there's been research in the US done on this. Burging is basking in reflected glory. Coughing is cutting off reflected failure. So when your team is doing well, you say, we did this, we did that, and you're loving the feeling of it. When the team is failing, then you find you don't want to be involved with it, you don't want to be connected with it, and you find an excuse. You say it's the ref's fault, or it's the cheating to other team, or whatever else, and you try to disassociate yourself with it. And with soft power, that's what countries are doing, is that they want to be involved, they want to be burging, they want to be basking in the reflected glory of this success, whether it's an event or an individual tournament, or we saw this with the Lionesses this summer. Suddenly politicians are appearing everywhere saying, I'm wearing the red rose, and just looking, like it was great for the country. They were basking in reflected glory. The opposite is when you see a national team failing. There's inquiries, and let's sack the manager because it's his fault or her fault. So I think this is happening, whether it's Formula One or any sport. It's this basic fan psychology going on, is that they're using the sport to promote countries, but they're doing it in a way that is this reflected glory. If you can get that reflected glory, then that's where the benefit comes from.
Yeah, I think that that definitely makes sense, and it's that sort of trying to attach yourself to certain values. So whether it's community through the engagement in the sport, or the elitism of particular athletes or events, you can see, who does the president want to stand next to for the photo op. But on that shared values, I think, Stephanie, back to you. How do you see women's sport and I suppose nations' respect and investment in it as a driver of those international relationships and perceptions?
It's interesting, actually, what you said about, in the end, sport doesn't matter, it's for fun, because, of course, one of the interesting things when you're campaigning within sport for gender equality is that having fun is quite an important thing in your life, really, and not being allowed to have fun because you've got to do all the care work, the ironing, the cooking and everything else, and you're in the kitchen, is not a great thing, And so there is something very symbolic about sport, massively symbolic, because it is about who is allowed to draw joy from life. It's quite profound. And then, of course, there's huge physical benefits of being a participant in community sport at school, anywhere, because you're literally building your bone strength for your later life. You are learning how to lose and pick yourself up, how to fail, how to take risks, all these life skills, which if you don't have an experience in sport as a child, as a young person, you then can't take into the workplace, into the rest of your life. So sport has got profound meaning. Watching elite sport and winning or losing has obviously, actually, in the end, less profound meaning. It had these other very interesting senses of unity and support and celebration of someone's commitment and things like that, but it's a bit different. And so when you look in, and in terms of soft power, how a nation is towards its women, really, how equal women and men are in a society is a very profound indication of how that society functions, and therefore how equal it is within sport in terms of gender equality is a reflection of that. And I would imagine now that there's been these big moments in women's sport, women's team sport, to be clear, because obviously individual sport has been very different, there will be a real shift, and I think it's very exciting to see some of that change, and I think it would be very, very interesting to see how that plays out. There's almost more people willing to sponsor. I talked to someone at the break, said there's people wanting to sponsor big teams in India, but now cricket's been taken, someone's put so much money, women's teams, they've put so much money into it. So it's going to be a catch-up game now, where the investment, the media exposure, etc., can come in. Because at the moment, let's be frank, the media exposure is still paltry. It's really, really poor. I mean, our study in 2018, 4% of the media exposure on sport was of women, and that was in 5 European countries. 2019, I think 95% of US sports coverage was of men. And it was still at the point where you pick up the feminist paper, The Guardian, obviously Boris wouldn't have done, but in the back pages, it's men's sport. But it says sport, but it's men's sport, and occasionally, if you win a European Cup, you get a bit of coverage, but, otherwise, pretty well you don't. So we're only just beginning that process. It's so far behind a lot of other progress in gender equality.
Yeah, and I think we were speaking earlier, and you mentioned representation, being able to see yourself. Although sport isn't important, we made it up, that kind of thing. It does exist and is in front of people and having that effect if you're not seeing yourself or you are. Changing across a little bit, and looking at sort of sport and the commercial aspect. David Mitchell, one thing that sort of happened this year relating to a big part of the discussion today, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, was sponsors being booted out of Formula One and drivers being dropped because of relationships with Russia and whatnot. How do you see sort of sports organisations separate to governments taking these stances, needing to take stances based on values? And is that purely commercial to protect other sponsors, or do you think it's driven by soft power elements and responsibility of sports as something with a huge audience?
I think, well, particularly with Russia, I think it was driven by the sport itself having a sense of responsibility, by the brands involved going, well, we can't be involved with a sport that is dealing with Russia. And I think you take a step back, you go back 3 or 4 years ago, you would see the race in Sochi. At the end of it, whoever won would go up to the cool-down room, and there would be Vladimir Putin standing in the cool-down room. He clearly saw it as an important place to be seen. It was probably the most awkward meeting you would ever see in your life, because they were standing there, they would just come out, they were sweaty, they were hot, they'd been racing for 2 hours, and there was Putin. There was no language barrier, he just stood there and stared at the camera, and it was just, they didn't know what to do. Poor drivers had no idea what to do. And then they'd get on the podium and that was back to normal again. It was really important to the Russian authorities that he was seen there and using that as a platform for soft power. So, with what happened, there was no choice, I think, for the sport to dissociate itself with that completely, which was a shame because, with the progress that Russia were making around the sport, they were moving the sport to St. Petersburg. It was going to be an amazing race. But, when their politics and their decisions take the direction they took, then the sport absolutely is right to step away from that. So I think you see whether it was individuals of the racing teams or the sponsors, then they were doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Your sort of chart that showed should politics be in or out of sport. I totally respect people who think it should definitely be out. I'm right at the other end of the spectrum. I feel sport, so this is a personal view, has a duty and a responsibility to talk to, maybe not political issues in a sort of party political sense, but issues other than just sport. And what takes me to that position is I think there's an earnest naivety on the part of those who say, let's but I'm thinking of Infantino, for example, of, let's keep the politics out, off the field. That's admirable, and it shouldn't be influencing, the participants and the athletes. But the thing is what's naive, though, is that the state actors, like Putin, will co-opt and use the event. However neutral you've tried to keep it yourself, they will use it to satisfy. And, sports wash, or whatever sort of term you like to use, to confer, bask in the reflected glory and confer status. And so I think, because of that, you therefore have to make it harder for them to do so.
I think that's right. So we've got, I think, a few minutes left. So one last question. I'm going to run through all of you. Maybe we go the other way this time. So if sports do build soft power, either themselves or through exposure and the sharing of values, what, from your individual perspectives, are the best investments a country or sports organisations can make? So from grassroots to elite medal-winning athletes, so giving out grants, to hosting or sponsorship of specific sports and engagement. How do they make those choices to sort of, I guess, best have holistic goals?
That's quite a big question. Oh, you've got an answer. Go for it.
Well, I think it's been incredible to see the support from the National Lottery into sport in the UK. From the 1996 Games to Tokyo 2021, Adam Peaty reached the 100th gold medal for Team GB, and really being a beneficiary of this financial input, it's really helped us as athletes. And I think the continuation of that, and in women's sports, really important to keep that going. We get so much enjoyment out of something like the Olympics when it comes around, but all that comes from the initial investment from the nation. So it's really important to sport in this country.
Anyone else? When I say investment, I don't just mean, monetary cash pouring in, but engagement and promotion of these, whether you think it has a positive return to you. Anyway, perhaps.
I think from a Formula One perspective, it's having places to go and race, and that I think is, you've seen the sport has expanded from 18 races a year to nearly 23, 24 now. To the extent it's causing problems for the teams to keep staff travelling around the world like that. So having those great places to go and race and having the support and telling the story and bringing people in, allowing the fans in, that's all, that's what we need to do. And there are new places that the team are going, and there are some countries which are dropping off. So, for example, at the moment, Germany, one of the great Formula One countries from a legacy perspective, now doesn't have a race and is sort of dropping into insignificance. So, that's a choice that the country is making. But continuing to have great places to go and race is for us is the important thing.
I mean, your statistics kind of suggested that sport per se isn't a massive contributor to soft power. And if the way you were sort of phrasing your question is, in what way would you make an investment in order to maximise your return on soft power? Sport would seem to be a poor recipient. I suppose my argument would be is governments, companies, society should invest in sport. I think from the grassroots up, but starting with the grassroots, because as Steph was implying there, it's a social good. It's a fundamental right, and I think it's an expression of the freedom and the kind of maturity of a society. So, my money would go on investing in sport from schools upwards.
I'm totally with you on that, and that recognition that you are investing in education in the biggest sense by making sport far more central to school life throughout. You're investing in health in an epic way. I mean, if you think of the really bad anxiety levels in teenage girls and all the horrific eating disorders, etc., sport is an antidote to anxiety. If you think of all the major health conditions that sport can help to alleviate, it's an incredibly important investment. And as you say, it's just a matter of right and wrong. So we've talked a lot today about the wrong of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it's gender equality as a matter of right and wrong, and you can invest in sport to address that. I don't want to sound to my microphone. You can invest in sport to address that. So use it as a way to equal rights.
Yeah, I think that the clock's gone red, so maybe they're turning.
Oh, maybe they're just sort of turning me off.
Playing the music. But I think the way you guys covered that is exactly what I was trying to get to, and our data showed that sports isn't the most important thing. There are other factors that are very important, but where you say we should invest is in the areas that promote the other values. So looking after the community, looking at health, infrastructure in terms of investing in a new area, say in London or anywhere you're hosting an Olympics. So I think hopefully people have a good impression of what they should be doing and what the end goals should be when engaging in sports and promoting it. I'd like to thank all my panelists, and I think we've got someone else up next, but I'm not sure.
Thank you.